Well, guys, welcome to Clinic 3. Apologies for the lateness of this, doing some hardware changes the night before. I messed up my audio settings a little bit, so the actual original recording didn't have any audio, as a couple of you noticed when I uploaded it, so thanks for that. Hopefully for you guys, this means that this post-clinic recording will be a little bit more succinct and allow you guys to get through it a little bit quicker. With that in mind, we'll get started. One little thing I wanted to mention before we get into what we're going to be talking about today is just a note on braking, and one of the things I talked about in the last clinic, and that's the idea of how quickly we get from our initial pressure to our peak pressure, and the idea that we want to do that as quickly as possible. And the reason I was talking about, the reason that we want to do that is we don't want to lose any time under brakes, kind of slowly getting up to our peak pressure, say at a given corner at 75%. We don't want to slowly get to our 75%. We want to get to our 75% as quickly as the situation allows for. What I noticed going back and listening to what I had talked about was I don't think I made that idea of what the situation allows for as clear as possible. I think it kind of sounded like you always want to get there as fast as humanly possible, i.e. go to your 75% right away, and that's not actually the case, because there's a bunch of things, a bunch of factors, and we will actually get into this a little bit more in depth in future clinics as to what exactly those factors are and what we need to look out for. But there are a bunch of factors that will affect how quickly we can get to our 75% for this corner example, basically. But the idea in the end is it's not always the best thing to go straight to 75% as quickly as possible, because what you can actually do is reduce the amount of grip available mainly in the front tires when you go into the corner by braking. So if you brake way too hard, one of the things that's going to happen is you will overheat, you will heat the surface temp of your tires more than you would have if you had more progressively gone onto the brakes. And we all know that more surface temperature equals less grip. So if you're braking extremely hard into a corner, even though you can get the car stopped, it's not like you're locking up or anything, but you're still increasing that surface temp more than you would like. It means you're going to have less grip when you're going through the corner, and that might actually hurt you more than braking a little bit slower. So that's one of the things to think about. So I don't want you guys to take it too literally as like, I always need to get to my max peak pressure as quickly as I possibly can, otherwise I'm losing time. There is a little bit of finesse that comes with that, so I just wanted to get that out of the way. Now moving on to our actual subject for today, we're going to be talking about positioning and angle. And this is something that's I find is one of the easier things to kind of grasp, at least in terms of a practice, and also an implementation and a gradual working up towards something. So basically, we'll stop this little replay for a second, and we'll do a little bit of math and geometry. But basically, through any particular corner, the wider the radius, or the longer the radius, so basically the bigger the circle you can make around that corner, the faster you're going to be able to travel around the corner. That's pretty easy to imagine if you think of a corner like Pouhon, which is quite wide. You carry a lot of speed through it, versus a corner, pick any chicane or hairpin. Actually, the one right here is a fairly decent example, although it is a rather long hairpin. It's still a much tighter radius. It's a smaller circle than Pouhon, for example. So the longer that radius, the faster you can travel along it. You have less steering input to put, and the less steering input you have to input through a corner, the more speed you can take through the corner, essentially. It's based on mathematics, but it's quite easy to imagine. We've all experienced it. You can't go around, a even how about the hairpin at Monaco? Not that it's in ACC, but everybody knows the corner. We can't go around that at 120 kilometers an hour, but you can go somewhere around some easier, less tight corners at 120 kilometers an hour, and that's just purely because we're doing a longer radius in those faster corners. We can travel that radius faster. Take that to one particular corner, and you end up with something like this. So for any given corner, you have the largest possible radius that you can draw through that corner, or the biggest possible circle. I think that's a little bit easier to imagine. So at a certain point, you simply can't find a faster line to take through that corner, a faster arc, if you will. For this corner I've drawn here, this is a 90-degree corner, and this is about the biggest circle that you can draw through this corner. We're just barely on the line here. We're just barely off the apex there. Actually, there might be 1 pixel on it, but we'll forget about that. And we're just barely off the exit. And this applies to basically every corner. Compound corners, which we'll get to maybe a little bit next week and a little bit the week after that. Compound corners are going to be a little bit more difficult, but the basic geometry of every corner is something like this. And this is where it's actually the application of the theory is quite easy to put onto the track, and then you can see yourself starting to practice better. I find this one a really, really cool way of doing it. But basically, the second the second you shrink the circle or you move the circle, you're in trouble. The first thing I'm going to say is what you need to have, is, and you guys will be able to see my cursor here, is you need to, in order to follow this circle, you need to be placed perfectly. This is basically the beginning of our turn. We can forget about basically these 3/4 of the circle because they're not applicable. It's just this part we're interested in here. But in order to be able to follow this radius, this arc through the corner, we have to have our car absolutely on the limit of the entry. There's no two ways about it. If you have your car, let's just no, actually I won't draw a car. If you have your car slightly to the right, so we move our circle to the right, like this, for example, well, what happens? We have hit the apex. And for the purposes of this, we'll say that hitting it means you've hit a wall or you have an off track, not hitting the apex like we normally talk about, which is a good thing. So you cannot, as soon as your entry is compromised, so is your apex and so is your exit. So say you say, okay, well, I'm going to have a slightly compromised entry. I'm not going to be all the way on the outside, but I'm not going to hit the apex. Okay, well, let's say same circle. We haven't altered the circle. We've still kept a little bit to the left of this entry, and now we're not hitting the apex. But what happens up here? Well, now we've hit a wall, if you're at Bathurst, for example, or you've got an off track on exit. So you very basically and very mathematically, you simply cannot carry the same amount of speed through a corner if you have compromised your car placement on entry. Period. Nothing more about that. You have to be here in order to have the rest of it work. You just have to be. And this is where we talk about being really precise and accurate with your car placement on entry, because it affects everything else through the corner, and we'll get a little bit into that after. But that's the idea of is you have control over your car on entry, and before the turn-in, you have to have your car right on this spot here, because here is a problem. You're just simply going to have to carry less speed through the corner. So if we do it, say we go through here, well, then we have to do this to the circle. We've made it a little bit smaller. And what happens when we make the circle smaller? It means we can't travel as fast along that circle. And now we're carrying less speed through the corner. So it's imperative that, if we make our circle a little bit bigger again, it's imperative that we get all the way to the outside of the corner. We have to set up our entry as best as possible. And that actually is kind of what we talk about when pushing. So let's say this place here, the black line is grass or a wall. A wall is a little bit easier to imagine, but we don't have that many of them in ACC. But let's say it's something that you can't really go over. So, you're braking right next to it / on it, and you can't really brake on grass because you'll spin, for example. Or you're at Bathurst and it's a wall and you can't go any further to the left. It's a danger zone, right? So during a race, if we want to be consistent and not crash all the time, maybe, going right to here is 100%, right? 100% of your effort, 100% of your pushing. Maybe during the race, you say, okay, I'm not going to go 100% every lap because there's, this place is danger. So I'm gonna bring it here. And I'm doing that knowingly. I'm doing it knowing that I'm going to have to reduce the size of that circle. I'm going to have to do this because then I know I can make it. I can make the corner and not hit not run into the wall at the apex or hit the wall on exit, or grass, get an off track kind of thing. Same idea. So you're going to run it maybe 90% or maybe 85. 85 is probably not enough, but let's say 90 or 95. And then this is where we talk about pushing. You're not pushing past the limits hoping for some, magical lap time to appear. You're pushing towards the limits that you have found for yourself during practice. And that limit is as far as you can bring this circle, right? So it's here. That's the limit. So when maybe you've done one good quali lap and now you say, okay, I'm going to push on my second quali lap. This is what we mean by pushing. It's getting closer to this 100% optimal spot to turn in from. But obviously getting closer to 100% means getting closer to hitting the wall or getting the grass and the off track kind of thing. But you're not going beyond it. You're not trying to carry more speed through this arc than we know is already possible from our practice. So that's what we mean by pushing. Pushing generally is pushing up towards 100%, not past it. And we're trying to get the most of the realistic lap time of a possible lap time, not turn some impossible lap time into reality, because that's never going to work. Now, a little bit of a change on to something like this, or not change, but a different scenario. So we've got our regular one like this, and we'll leave all our circle. And maybe let's just draw a little car here, but let's do it in black. So this is our normal our normal car placement here. So what I'll say here is it's important to have our car parallel, north-south in this case, to this basically the straight part of the circle, right before it begins to arc. Those who are in geometry know there's no real straight part of the circle, but for visual sake, right here, because this is a point where normally you're coming in to brake. So we'll do another color here. You're probably coming something like this into brake. Not move that. And in the section just after this, we'll talk about angle of the car, but it's important to have it parallel. And we all kind of get that intuitively. But what happens if the corner layout is a little bit weird? So we'll draw something else here. So another corner. And let's do, actually, you know what? Let's do it the other way. How about not that this makes a difference for you, but in my mind, it makes a difference. So we'll do this, and then we'll do something like, let's say something, well, no, that's a little bit excessive. Something like, as is that, something like this. So very slight angle away from the corner. And something straight, and then let's have it be quite a quite an angled corner. Actually, let's do it here. No, there we go. Like that. Okay, I think that works. So this is our corner. We've all seen it, something like this, right? Basically, what I'm trying to show you guys is there's a little kink here, right? kink in the, in the grass, and the white line it juts out a little bit, and then the actual track itself ends up either going out, or in another example it would come in somewhere like this, right? So what do we do in these situations? Because if we follow our normal line, we'll do it in red, I guess. No, we did yellow here, so let's do yellow. Actually, green, it'll be easier to see. But that's a circle, not a line. So if we follow our normal line of braking, you come up through here, and then you're initiating your turn. We'll get our circle going here. This is going to have to be quite a big circle. Let's see. Hopefully that's big enough. It's actually too big. Perfect. So it's not a circle now, but we're gonna our apex. I'm gonna have to cheat a little bit. Okay. So something like this. You guys get it. It's not perfect, but for the sake of demonstration, it'll work. What we want here is, and that actually I haven't really drawn it properly, so I'm going to forget that for now. But basically, is we see on entry here, we've actually given up a little bit of room because we've just come straight following the track. So what we really want to do, because we want to open up, as we know from our previous example here, we want to be as far left, or well, left in this case, left, but we want to be as far towards the outside of the corner to open it up, basically to allow us to create a bigger circle. So what we want is to be as far to the outside of the corner on turn-in as possible. And this is true 99% of the time. There's some cases where we do leave a little bit on the table because it doesn't actually make sense to go further out because it creates a longer distance or a weird angle. But basically what we would want to do in this particular situation is actually, we got a circle again, is actually angle our approach to be able to follow this line. So our approach is something more like this, and then we're turning in from, rather than turning in from, here, we're turning in from here. And it's a poorly drawn example, but maybe that's half a car's width difference of our turn-in, and that actually helps. That makes a bigger circle, a wider arc for us to be able to travel on, and thus carry more speed. So that's the first part of things. We want to be further towards the outside, or as far towards the outside as possible, and we want to do that lap after lap to be able to take advantage of the biggest arc through the corner that we possibly can. And I'm going to show you guys now in ACC a couple examples of that. Well, actually one example of that. So this will be going into T2 at brands. So watch where my first car placement is here. Actually, I'll pause it. So if we back this up slowly, well, I don't want to back up anymore. So I begin braking here, and if we look at that, we've got there we go. So we've got room here. It's tough to tell how much room we have, but we might have half a car. We've got maybe not quite half a car. Let's say a quarter of a car here. So I'm very definitely not all the way to the left. And we'll watch the car through the rest of the corner here at full speed of me not taking advantage of all the track. Let's pause it right here, and let's go on board and see how much speed we're carrying. Actually, let's just do this, the HUD. So right here, we're carrying 140 kilometers an hour. Actually, you know what? Let's bring it back so we can take a spot at the apex or just after on the exit of the corner. Okay, so here we're doing 76 kilometers an hour. Then, I believe it was this lap here. Apologies, because I don't remember exactly. Watch where the car placement is here. I haven't quite started braking yet. But there, now we're braking. And look where we are. So if we go to F7. I'm not right on the white line. Because I am, you know, I'm giving it a little bit of leeway. But way more track usage here. Maybe a couple of feet. And that's going to allow me, if I carry that through, which I do, to the corner, it's going to allow me to have a slightly wider arc through this corner. It's not a massive difference visually or in the grand scheme of things, but it does help our corner. And if we go by here, it's actually bigger than I thought. I believe we're in this view, so let's be honest about where we are. So, you know, what did we say, 76 before, and now we're carrying 81 kilometers an hour through. That's probably a little bit exaggerated because I probably did the mid corner a little bit better as well. But still, you know, we're 5 kilometers an hour faster coming out of this corner than we were on the previous example, and that makes a really big difference over the course of a lap. You know, that's probably 2/10 just in that corner there. To make it through. So that's a visual representation, you know, and we can even do in the car. So if we go back to lap 5, that's actually, I prefer this view. So you see my steering wheel, like, watch, you know, you can tell that you're carrying a lot less speed in this one where we don't brake perfectly. It's more awkward. I have to turn the steering wheel more versus, let's go to lap 8. That's not what we wanted. Versus this one, where we're definitely, you know, we're quite far on the left. Carry that nice angle of entry, that good positioning, and the corner just flows easier. It's a lot easier to drive through the corner. One thing I'll note is, let's just go to the same spot on lap 5, just while we're at it. And so we begin braking here. So it doesn't, on board, it looks like we're quite close to the line. It's a really good note for you guys when you're practicing, is don't take it for granted that when you're looking at something like this, that means that you're on the line. Because again, when we take a look at it, you're really not on the line. You got 2 feet to the line, or 1.5 feet. I'm not always the best judge of this, but so, you know, back in the car, move forward a little bit. Most people's view is something like this. You know, this versus, you know, now we're braking here. This, it's not a huge difference when you're, you know, on board in the car driving, but it's a pretty big difference there. You know, there's your extra 1.5 feet kind of thing. So what you want to start doing is initially, if you're relatively new or you haven't practiced this kind of thing before, is take a look at where this white line lines up with something in your cockpit, something in your peripheral vision. We're all going to drive in a slightly different view, but you know, for me, it's just slightly to the left of this first shift light. It's in line with that carbon molding here. It's basically in line with my left hand, so you can kind of pick anything you want, and then you know that's when your car is just next to the line. See, I'm not even on it, right? Like this isn't full 100% push, because if I was 100% pushing, my tire would be right there. But this gives me an idea of a safe, but you know, still making almost complete use of the track, and then I can start to reference that. And what you don't want to be doing is looking down inside your cockpit to find your reference of where the line is when you're driving. Don't be doing that. But it's basically a peripheral reference. So your eyes want to be basically when you're braking here, your eyes want to be searching for that apex already. You don't want to be looking down here inside the cockpit trying to match up the line with where you are. But when you're first doing some practice laps, definitely go out and find something in the cockpit that matches up with that when you are roughly here. And then you'll be able to, as you get used to paying attention to it with your peripheral vision, you'll get better and better at picking it out, and you'll get better and better of knowing exactly where your car is on the track, rather than doing a lap like this and thinking, when you get to this point, here we go, braking, thinking you're close to the line and then you're off. So that's what you don't want. So yeah, definitely practice that. And even what I tend to do is on the first, even 10-15 laps sometimes, is like I'll go out on any particular track and I will literally drive the car on entry, and especially on exits. I tend to do this, is I will drive the car into the grass or as far as getting an invalidated lap, so that I just start to learn instinctively where those limits are and how far I can push the car out to the outside without either spinning under braking or locking up because of grass, or on exit getting an invalidated lap time because I'm too far to the outside. So it's a really good exercise to go through. The second part of this is angling of the car. And this is quite important. There's a lot of the tracks in ACC. To be honest, a lot of tracks. Almost every track you drive in every sim is going to have a few corners where there's kind of a natural temptation to have the car, or it's not a conscious temptation, but it's a track layout temptation that'll mean that you're having the car braking towards the outside of the corner, so away from the direction you're turning in. And we'll go back to our little visuals here. That's a really bad thing, because for every corner, you want the minimum degrees of rotation possible. So for this corner, this is 90 degrees. That's pretty simple, right? It's straight right. If we added, or not even if we added, let's turn this corner into nothing and go back to this one. So if we do one like this, oops, very quickly, poorly drawn, our degrees of rotation here is 180. What we don't want to be doing is having our car angled. We don't want to have our car angled in, well, we'll leave it green now because I'm incompetent. This, something like this, going into the corner and into the braking, because that means we are braking away from the corner. And now, instead of 180, we're adding, and let's see if I can get the drawing properly here. We're adding maybe 15, 20 degrees of angle, because our line is no longer straight, right? We've got this, this angle right here to add to our whole corner. And the more you have to turn your steering wheel, the slower you have to go. It's kind of the same thing we're talking about with a smaller arc or a smaller radius of turn, is you have to turn your steering wheel more. And so it's the same thing. The more you have to turn your steering wheel, the longer it's going to take to get through that corner. So you have the opportunity in this 180 example to align your car properly and come in at it, completely straight here like this. And now you've got only your 180 degrees rather than this, let's say 195 that you would have to do. So again, in 99% of circumstances, you want and need to have your car complete, and this is again why you want to have your car parallel to whatever the or one of the reasons why you generally want to have your car parallel to the complete outside, because it helps you align for the corner. But you always want to have your car aimed parallel with the direction of the corner and not away. You never want to be braking away from the corner. And there's two good examples of this in brands. So let's go back to here, and I'm going to show you first T3, and then there's another one that's a little bit more subtle. So T3, I'll just slow it down here for a second, it is actually kind of obvious. It's a good one to get you thinking about what happens here. So, what do we have here? We've got a straight line headed towards the corner, but that straight line, if we follow this white line right here, where does it take us? It takes us back up the hill, aiming towards T1 and off into the bleachers here. But where is the corner going? And this would be 1, 2, so this is either 3 or 4, depending on whether you consider this kink a corner. But this corner here is not going out this way. This corner is going off to the left here. So to have your car under braking, if you keep this angle of attack, you're going to have the car under braking headed out this way. So let's say, for sake of argument, this here is a 90-degree corner right here. You're adding maybe another 30 degrees to that corner, so it's now 120, which is going to cost you a lot of time. But the thing is that the tendency is natural. Watch this. If we kind of do a relatively normal approach to this corner, I hope you guys notice that on watch the brake trace and watch where the car is aiming as I start braking. So you guys saw that. Now, when we're, begin to brake here, well, a little bit before that, but you take my point, and I'm already having to steer through here. So now not only do I have to brake, I also have to take off all that extra degrees away from the corner that I am here, right? Like I'm still only pointed here, when if I was aligned with this, all I would have to do was brake following this and then turn into the corner. Now I have to brake, take off all the speed, take off all this annoying angle that I've created for myself unnecessarily, and then do the normal angle of the corner based on this line right here, the maximum place that we can have the car positioned. So I still end up here, which is pretty roughly the max, the max place where I can turn in from. But I'm not angled. I'm not angled well at all. What I need to have happen here is I need to have the car straight, right? I need to have the car pointing up towards here, not, if you follow a straight line here. More realistically, if I was following this, it'd probably be something like this, right? So I've created myself extra angle because I'm not paying attention to what happens in the track, and it's all too easy, right? Like you're racing, you're not really paying attention. It's tight, and it seems weird. But what the proper thing to do is, if we go to the next lap, or not next lap, but the proper lap is, we'll play it at full speed for you here first. Watch what I do here. It feels awkward, right? Like we're used to taking the shortest distance to something, but the shortest distance to something often will create us problems, especially under braking. So we do this kind of weird pull out from the normal line in order to align ourselves properly with the track. And even here, I didn't get it perfect, right? You can see I'm still angling back towards the corner. So ideally, I would want to be even straighter earlier. But it does mean that when I go to turn in, and we'll play this a lot slower, I am turned straight as I'm turning in right now. So there I'm as far as I can be to the right, and I'm parallel with that point, right? So I'm now parallel right here, and then I begin the turn in roughly about there. But see, from the turn in, I'm perfectly parallel with this white line, which is basically, if we think back to our circle, that's here. I'm parallel with this part of it. I'm as far outside as I can be, and I'm parallel with that line following out from the corner that goes here, and then perpendicular, which is perpendicular to that line here. So this is basically just a mirror of the same corner with a little bit more angle out towards here. But that's the proper way to do it, and I'll tell you guys later how much time that actually gave me. Just doing that simple jink out to the right to properly position ourselves makes a really, really big difference. So this is the second thing. The first thing is making sure that we're using all the track on our entry, properly positioning the car so that we've got we're making the biggest radius through the circle, that biggest arc. This is the second thing, which is kind of second and third, but mainly second is proper angle through the corner. So having our car parallel, not creating extra degrees of rotation or an extra angle through the corner is also really important. The third thing is kind of that what I was talking about is that not all corners are created equal. So that's making sure that if there's a kink and you have extra space to use at a corner, that you use it rather than following the natural line through the corner. And that's why I've saved turn 1 for last, because it actually represents both those things in one. So angle and space being used because of a kind of more complex corner, not a simple straight 90-degree corner. So I hope you guys will spot this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go nice and far out from the car, kind of an above view, like this. We'll angle ourselves down. So this is not an ideal lap, but just watch what happens at turn 1 here. So it doesn't look terrible, right? Like I still clipped the apex, but the important part here is, and we'll slow it down, the important part here is, 1, I don't use all the track. 2, I'm braking. Like, where am I braking right now? The corner goes this way, and if I draw a straight line here, I'm braking out towards 505 games. Second, as I turn in, yes, I'm kind of using all the track here, but I'm not properly aligned with the corner. The turning begins roughly here. Oh, I've gone too far now. But basically, still messing up. I'm angled away, and we can see that there's space on the left here, and we know this is a tricky corner, right? Like, I'm under no illusion that this is an easy corner. We're trying to avoid this weird spot right here that unsettles the car, but we're not using all the space we can because we should be coming parallel with this part, right? I'm coming angled out this way, and what we talked about initially was wanting to come parallel to this. So it's about setup. So I've created myself extra angle through the corner, and I haven't used all the room possible. If we go to this lap, let's just watch the difference at full speed. Watch how we initially position the car. So hopefully you guys are able to see the difference. An initial jink there, and now we're nice and parallel as we get to the braking zone. It was a little bit more unstable, but now let's slow it down here. So we've got, we'll back it up. The important part is to watch the initial setup of the corner. So this little jink that I'm doing here now sets me up well because I'm avoiding this kind of weird spot here where there's a compression and then a bump. And I'm setting myself up on the left to be able to take advantage of all the the extra room on the track here to be able to turn in from. But I'm also beginning to align myself when I get to it to be aligned with this area here, which is basically the turn-in point, rather than having the car being straight facing this way, which is, again, that's the second important part of this. So watch what happens when it comes through the corner. Setting up, setting up, setting up, braking, and then as we arrive at it, nice and parallel, and then we don't have that extra turning to do on the steering wheel. We can just go through the corner. Now I do miss the apex a little bit, so it wasn't perfect, but it was faster, and again I'll tell you guys after when we put all those three things together. So this is an example of quite a subtle corner, right? You don't like coming up to it in the car. Actually, let's do this one because it shows the wheel, and we'll do full speed. Coming up to it in the car, it's not immediately obvious that you've missed anything here. Actually, let's do the bad lap first. Yeah, it's not immediately obvious that you've missed anything, that you haven't taken advantage of the full track. You know, it looks okay here. We hit the side, but then if you went back and looked at it from that top view, you'd be like, wait a minute, I haven't used all the track, and I'm angled really weird going into the corner. Can I do anything to fix that? And sometimes the answer will be no. You know, there'll be some massive bump in the road that means you have to avoid it, and you can't take the perfect line. So sometimes that's okay, right? There's things that about the nature of the track that keep you from taking what normally would be the absolute optimal spot or optimal line, and that's okay. Don't worry about that. But in this case, we can give it a test, and we see that it actually works. So, you know, visually from on board, this is what doing it better looks like. I'm angled properly, less steering, miss the apex a little, but we're faster. So that's basically an idea of a little more subtle one where you can take advantage of these tricks that we talked about. The final thing I think that I'll talk about today is kind of areas of danger, or like how close can we get to walls, track limits, and where should we get close to them when we're pushing or when we're kind of learning this whole thing. And it's quite easily breaking down into three categories. I'll start with the hardest. The hardest is the exit, and that's the reason for that is everything you've done before the exit has set you on a path, right? You've had your corner, you've had your braking, you've had your corner entry placement, you've had your turn-in point, you've had how you angled yourself towards the exit, you've had how much speed you carried, sorry, not at the exit, but at the apex. You've had how much speed you carried at the apex. You've had where the car has been at the apex. And all those things have already happened. You can no longer affect what's happened prior to the corner. And all those things have set you on a particular course at a particular speed toward a particular point on your exit. And once that's already happened, there's very little you can do about the exit. So if you've done it wrong, really the only option you have is to either let off the gas or brake to slow the car down, or you can go wide, get an off track, or hit a wall if you're on a track where you're hitting a wall. Those are the only options you have once you're getting towards the exit. So if you're trying to push the exit, you have basically what's has to have happened is you had to have given up speed or positioning on the entry so that you know you're coming towards the exit of the corner slower than you were the last lap. That's the only way you can push on exit. So pushing on exit is really not going to gain you anything, because most of the time it's going to end up in tears because there's no more room to push. The second hardest place to push is at the apex, because again, and it's the same, it's the same logic that follows through. You've already had everything you did under braking and under turn-in and the speed you're carrying there affecting what's happening at the apex. So you've got a more limited area of maneuverability or area of play to actually use when you're coming towards the apex, because you've already got a fixed speed. You already basically have your angle of rotation that you're doing through the corner, and you already had the placement on entry. So by far the easiest place to actually push things, push your car placement, push the speed that you're doing, push your braking. The easiest place to do that is on entry, because you're free before that, right? So if you're coming into this corner here, and just slow it down, when you're coming up to this point, you're free. You can move your car left or right with the steering. You know how much speed you're carrying. You can choose to brake a little bit earlier or a little bit later. You can alter your turn-in point. So those are all things that you're free to do. Once those things are set, now I've braked, now I turned in, now I'm headed in a particular direction, and the only things I can do to change are, okay, yes, I can turn the car more, but with the speed I'm carrying at a certain point, that turning is not going to make a difference anymore because I'm going to start understeering. So there's only so much steering lock I can now put on at this speed that's going to change the car placement heading towards the apex, right? We're looking at the apex here. There's only so much I can do to change what's happening as I go towards the apex. So I can turn a little bit more, but eventually that's going to stop working because of understeer. Too much turning. I can begin to brake or let off the gas, sure, but that also means I reduce my speed. And then as we go through the corner, and then I, you know, focus on my exit right here. Okay, so I'm back on gas now. I'm heading towards the exit. I really want to use all the exit I can. Okay, fine, but I'm carrying 94 kilometers an hour already. I've already done everything before, so I'm quite limited as to how much, you know, how quickly I can come at this exit without going off track. So that's the basic idea. Always focus initially and most of your efforts on the entry, because that's where that's by far where you stand to gain the most time, especially once you start doing it right as well, because then that sets up everything else. If you do the first part right here, it's much easier to get the second part right because you've already set yourself on the right track. So, you know, that's one little note there is really focus on the entry. Make sure you've got your car placement right, you know, as far to the outside as you possibly can. And then, you know, you're braking in your turn-in points, and that's really where you want to focus your efforts. Just a little recap before I show you, you know, both the slower laps and the slower lap and the faster lap back to back, and tell you what the time difference was. So the three things basically that I want you guys to remember are: create the widest possible arc at every corner, or the longest possible corner radius. Why is that? Well, technically that's because the longer the radius, the bigger the arc, the faster you can travel through it, and the more speed you'll be able to carry through the corner means you're faster. How do we do that? It means setting the car up on entry as wide as possible. That's number one. Moving on to point number two, that means also on entry, we want to be parallel with the line here. We want to be parallel with the arc that's created, or the beginning of the arc that's created. The counterpoint to that is we do not want to be headed away towards the outside of the corner. We'll go back to our example here. So point two, we do not want to be braking, as we are here, away towards the outside of the corner. We want to be parallel with the arc that's created through the corner here, parallel to the beginning of the arc that's created through the corner. That's point number two, because that will allow us to have the the smallest degrees of rotation through the corner, and again carry more speed. And point three is we want to take advantage of extra space that's given to us on tricky corners. So that again would be looking at the tough corners that we have, or the more difficult corners where we think there might be extra room to be had, extra time to find, and going back and looking and making sure that, you know, if we're off the entry a little bit, i.e. there's still track or room available on the entry when we're turning in, kind of like if we just back it up a little bit, kind of like here, that means we know that we can go and take advantage of that extra little room on the entry. So that's the third one, is taking advantage of corner irregularities where there's more room than initially appears. Not possible, I guess, is the right word there. And so finally, let's run through the laps. We'll run through them on board, because I think that's the best way of taking a look at it. So this is the lap where things are not done perfectly, so leaving time on the table basically. Not perfectly aligned here and not all the track. Coming up to the next corner, not being all the way to the left. And then not angling the car properly here. And as a counterpart to that, so visually looking at that quickly, you guys might, if any of us were to look at those two onboard clips back to back, we may not actually say that there was, a lot of time difference between those two things, looking at it quickly. But if we were to break it down and look at it a few more times, you'd say, well, the second one looked a lot smoother. It just seemed to flow a lot easier, and that's the feeling you start to get when you start to apply these. Not even tricks, but these skills is things seem to flow a little bit easier, and that's just because you're having to do less work with the car to get the time out of the car. We're not having to turn as much because we're placing our car better and we're angling it better as well. So it does end up a lot smoother, and it's also faster. And so through these 3 corners, applying those skills better, it wasn't even perfect. I was 6.5 tenths faster through 3 corners. So the lap overall was a second quicker, but that's because I went faster in the second part of it as well. But in 3 corners, 6.5 tenths is huge. That's a lot of lap time, just by applying those particular, those 3 skills, or 2.5 skills, let's say, properly. There's a lot of time to be found. So yeah, keep that in mind. Practice getting closer and closer to the limit, and then getting comfortable with it. Make sure you're making the best use of extra track available if there is some. Making sure you're aligned with the corner as you're braking and not angled away, and creating yourself more steering that you don't actually need to do. Yeah, you guys should see your lap times start to drop. Thanks, and we'll catch you again next week. Cheers.